Think about stuff around your house, things that seem, totally fine, like an air freshener maybe,
Mm.
or even just the water in your humidifier.
Hmm.
You wouldn't automatically think, oh, this could be a serious health risk, would you?
Not usually, no.
Yeah.
But sometimes there's more going on beneath the surface.
Right.
And today, we're diving into a recent study that looked at exactly that kind of, well, unexpected risk. It's a paper called Association Between Humidifier Disinfectant Use and Development of Lung Cancer, a nested case cohort study.
Okay.
And our mission here is really to unpack what they found and what it might mean for people who actually use these disinfectant products.
And this whole issue with humidifier disinfectants, it's not brand new, is it? I feel like I remember something happening in South Korea.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, back in 2011, there was this investigation in South Korea. They were seeing a really worrying spike in severe lung problems, particularly hitting pregnant women.
Oh.
And yeah, their investigation pointed pretty strongly toward these humidifier disinfectants being the likely cause.
Hmm.
So by 2012, it was officially recognized. They called it Humidifier Disinfectant Associated Lung Injury, or HDLI.
HDLI, got it.
And at first, the main focus was, respiratory issues, severe lung damage, asthma-like symptoms.
So we knew they could mess with your lungs pretty badly. But this new study, it's asking if that damage could go even further, potentially leading to cancer down the road.
That's exactly the question. Because as time went on, more reports started surfacing, suggesting a possible connection between using these things and getting lung cancer.
Hmm.
Now, it wasn't immediately clear if this was, just coincidence or something more. But enough cases accumulated that it really became crucial to look into it scientifically.
Okay, so how do you even start to investigate something like that? What did the researchers actually do?
Well, they use a specific study design called a nested case cohort study. So picture this. They started with a big national database in South Korea.
Oh.
It had 7,343 people who had already filed claims for health problems they thought were caused by these disinfectants.
Right, so people already potentially affected.
Exactly. Within that larger group, they identified 195 individuals who had later been diagnosed with lung cancer. They used specific medical codes, ICD-10 codes, and then they went back and reviewed medical records to be sure.
And crucially, they made sure these people didn't already have lung cancer before they used the disinfectants.
Yes, absolutely. That was a key exclusion criteria.
Hmm.
So they had this group use HDs, later developed lung cancer.
Okay, so how did they figure out if that number, 195 cases, was unusual, like higher than you'd normally expect?
Right. That's where they used a measure called the Standardized Incidence Ratio, the SR.
Sarafar. Okay.
Think of it as a comparison. They looked at the number of lung cancer cases they found in their study group and compared it to the number of cases you'd expect to find in the general South Korean population.
Ah, controlling for things like age.
Exactly. Age, the calendar year of diagnosis, and really importantly, smoking status.
Yeah, because smoking is obviously a huge factor in lung cancer. You'd have to account for that.
Definitely. They needed to make sure smoking wasn't just explaining everything away.
Makes sense.
And they did another comparison too, this time within their study group. They used a technique called propensity score matching, or PSM.
Propensity score matching.
Yeah.
What does that involve?
It's basically a way to create fair comparisons. They took each person with lung cancer and found one or more people without lung cancer from their cohort who were really similar, matched on age, sex, and their smoking history.
Okay, so comparing like with like, but one group got cancer and the other didn't.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this let them zoom in on whether differences in how they use the humidifier disinfectants, like for how long, were linked to the cancer risk.
And they followed these people over time.
Yeah, the follow-up started from when they were first exposed, which could be 2002 or later for some, and it went up until 2020, or until they were diagnosed, or sadly, until death.
And for that internal comparison, the PSM one, did they look at diagnoses right away?
Mostly, they focused on cancers diagnosed at least 5 years after the first exposure, but they also did sensitivity analyses, kind of like checks, looking at different time lags, 0 years, 1 year, even 10 years.
Okay, got it. So two main comparisons. The study group versus the general population, and then matched people within the group. What did that first comparison, the SARA one, show?
The results there were really quite striking.
Yeah.
They found a significantly higher incidence of lung cancer among the people who used the disinfectants compared to what was expected in the general population.
Yeah.
And this was true for both men and women, right from the start, with no time lag considered.
How much higher?
For men, the SARA was 3.43, so more than 3 times the expected number of cases.
Wow.
But for women, it was even more dramatic. The score was 11.19. Yeah. So women in this specific cohort who use these disinfectants were found to have, well, over 10 times the rate of lung cancer diagnosis compared to the general female population.
Yeah.
It's a really
Okay.
alarming figure.
That's staggering. And did those high numbers hold up even when they looked at cases diagnosed later on, like after a few years?
Yes, they did. Even when they applied a 1-year lag or a 5-year lag between exposure and diagnosis, those SRs stayed significantly elevated.
So it wasn't just an immediate effect.
It appears not. And another really interesting point, they broke it down by smoking status too.
Right.
Even when they looked just at, say, men who never smoked or women who never smoked, the rate of lung cancer in the HD exposed group was still significantly higher than expected compared to never smokers in the general population. Same for former smokers and current smokers among men.
So even if you never smoked, using these disinfectants was linked to a higher rate in this group.
That's what the ester comparison suggests, yes. And one other little detail among women, those who were former smokers and used HDs actually had a numerically higher SR than the never smoking women who used HDs.
Hmm. Interesting nuance there. Okay, so the general comparison points to a much higher rate. What about the internal comparison, the matched one, where they looked at usage patterns?
Yeah, that PSM analysis where they controlled carefully for age, sex, and smoking pointed very clearly towards one particular factor, the duration of use.
How long people use the disinfectants?
Exactly. They found that people who use them for a longer period of time had a significantly increased risk of developing lung cancer.
How much longer?
Specifically, they looked at usage duration, and using them for more than 49 months, so just over 4 years, was linked to an odds ratio of 2.48.
Meaning almost 2.5 times the odds of getting lung cancer compared to those who use them for shorter periods, even after matching.
That's right. A more than twofold increase in odds associated with using it for over 4 years in that matched group.
That seems like a pretty strong signal for duration.
It does. And it gets even more specific. They actually found what's called a dose-response relationship.
Meaning the more you used it, the higher the risk?
Essentially, yes. For every single month longer that someone reported using these disinfectants, their odds of developing lung cancer went up by a factor of 1.02.
Okay, 1.02 per month doesn't sound huge on its own, but
But it really adds up over time, right?
yeah.
Over several years of use, that steady increase per month becomes quite substantial. It really underscores the potential importance of long-term exposure.
Right, that cumulative effect. Okay, so duration was key. What about other ways people might have used them? Did it matter, like, how much they put in each time or how close they sat to the humidifier?
You know, in that matched analysis, those other characteristics, things like the single dose amount, the number of hours per day it was on, the distance from the machine, even room size and ventilation, those didn't show a statistically significant association with lung cancer risk.
So it really came down to how long you were exposed more than those other details.
That seems to be the main takeaway from that part of the analysis, yeah. Though it's worth remembering they also did those sensitivity checks with different time lags after first exposure.
And how did those turn out?
Well, the odds ratio increase per month of exposure wasn't always statistically significant when looking right after exposure, like at 0 or 1 year. But the trend was generally there, and the association between longer duration and higher risk became clearer and statistically significant when they looked at cases diagnosed 10 or more years after the first exposure.
Okay, so maybe a longer latency period is involved for the cancer risk compared to the immediate lung injury.
That's certainly a possibility suggested by those sensitivity results.
This all sounds quite concerning, but studies like this often have limitations, things we need to be careful about, right? Did the researchers mention any?
Oh, absolutely. And it's really crucial we talk about these. One of the biggest potential issues they highlighted is something called selection bias.
Selection bias, meaning the group wasn't necessarily representative.
Kind of. Remember, the study cohort was made up of people who had already come forward reporting health damage they believed was linked to the disinfectants.
Right, they were already concerned.
Exactly. So this group might be fundamentally different from the general population of everyone who ever used these products. They might be more health conscious or perhaps more likely to attribute any subsequent health issue, like lung cancer, to the disinfectant exposure.
Ah, I see. So those incredibly high SIRR numbers, like the 11 for women, might be inflated because the group studied was already pre-selected for having perceived health issues.
That's the concern, yes. The researchers themselves cautioned that the SR values likely overestimate the true risk for the average user and shouldn't be taken as the definitive risk estimate for lung cancer from these products.
Okay, that's a really important qualification.
Definitely. They also point out they didn't have a truly unexposed control group from the same source population for comparison, which would have made the findings, even more robust.
Right.
And like almost any observational study, there's always the chance that other factors they couldn't measure, maybe differences in income, education level, where people lived, maybe even other environmental exposures could be influencing the results. Unmeasured confounders, they call them.
Got it. Were there any other, like, weird patterns in the results that stood out?
Yeah, a couple of things were a bit unusual. They actually found a higher percentage of lung cancer cases occurring in younger people, folks under 40, within their study group, compared to what you typically see in national lung cancer statistics.
Huh, that is odd.
It is. And also, the ratio of men to women who developed lung cancer in the cohort was much closer to 50-50 than the usual pattern in the general population, where lung cancer is often more common in men.
So younger age onset and a different male to female ratio in this group. Why would that be?
The study doesn't provide a definitive answer, but it notes these as peculiar findings that really warrant more investigation. It raises questions about whether HD exposure might trigger cancer differently or in different demographics.
So we have the suggested link, especially with longer use, alongside these important caveats. Do we have any clues about how these disinfectants might actually cause or contribute to cancer? What could be happening biologically?
Well, the paper touches on existing research that offers some potential mechanisms. One of the main chemicals involved, PHMG.
PHMG, okay.
Yeah, polyhexmethylene guanidine. Some previous research, including animal studies, has suggested it could be carcinogenic. Like, long-term exposure in rats led to lung changes, including tumors.
So animal data exists.
Yes, and there's also work done in labs, in vitro studies, looking at human lung cells. Some of that research suggests PHMG can cause genetic changes, like DNA damage in lung cells, changes that are often steps on the pathway towards cancer developing.
Okay, so potential direct carcinogenic effect from the chemical itself.
That's one possibility.
Yeah.
Another idea floated is maybe more indirect. We know these disinfectants cause severe lung injury, including lung scarring or fibrosis in many people.
Right, the HDL.
Exactly. And we also know that having chronic lung fibrosis is itself a known risk factor for developing lung cancer later on.
So the disinfectant causes the fibrosis, and then the fibrosis increases the cancer risk.
That's another plausible pathway they mention. However, this particular study didn't specifically assess how many people in the cohort had fibrosis. They also noted that due to the data they had, they couldn't really dig into the interaction between smoking and HD exposure in detail.
So still questions remaining about the exact how.
Definitely. They really stress the need for more research. Ideally, establishing a proper prospective cohort following a group of exposed individuals over many years to confirm the association and really pin down the mechanisms involved.
Okay, so pulling it all together, what's the main headline someone listening should take away from this deep dive?
I think the key takeaway is that this study provides evidence suggesting a potential link between using these specific humidifier disinfectants, particularly for extended periods, and an increased risk of developing lung cancer later in life.
The duration of use seems really critical based on their findings.
Yes, the association appeared stronger and more consistent with longer durations of exposure.
But, and this is a big but, we absolutely have to remember those limitations, especially the selection bias, right? This isn't proof positive that the disinfectants cause lung cancer in everyone who used them.
Precisely. It's a strong signal from a specific group of claimants, raising serious concerns that need further investigation. But we need to be cautious about extrapolating these very high-risk numbers directly to the entire population of past users without more research.
Yeah. It really makes you think, though, doesn't it? About all the chemicals we bring into our homes, things we assume are perfectly safe.
It absolutely does.
Mm.
You start wondering, what other products that seem harmless today might have unforeseen long-term health consequences that we just haven't uncovered yet.
And it highlights how difficult it must be to establish these kinds of links, especially for diseases like cancer that can take decades to show up after an exposure.
Exactly. It takes time, careful study design, and often, sadly, requires people experiencing health problems before the dots get connected. It's definitely a reminder of why ongoing research in environmental health is so vital and maybe makes us all think a bit more critically about the everyday products surrounding us.